The fire alarm was blaring. My pool was foaming like a rabid cappuccino, and Karen was standing in the middle of it all, drenched in bubbles and screaming that her dog was having a medical emergency. Meanwhile, Rufus, the golden retriever in question, was happily paddling around in my pool like he was on vacation. Neighbors had gathered with phones out, filming the absurd chaos, while Karen flailed in slow motion like she was auditioning for a soap opera reboot. I stood calmly at the edge of the madness, sipping a lemonade, and thought, this all started because she said my pool was public domain. But let me take you back to the moment this surreal story began. Before the foam, before the sirens, before the dog nearly short-circuited my entire backyard. Just 3 weeks earlier, my mornings were boring in the best way possible. I had a routine, hot coffee, check emails, and relaxed by the pool in peace. It wasn't much, but after working years as a tech contractor, I'd earned some quiet. The pool wasn't just a luxury. It was my sanctuary, tucked behind a 6-foot privacy fence with a keypad gate. So when I got a ping on my security app saying, motion detected, backyard, I assumed it was a raccoon or one of the neighborhood kids trying to snag a float again. What I didn't expect to see on the live feed was Karen. Yes, that Karen, unlatching my gate with one hand while carrying her dog like royalty with the other. Karen was the self-declared queen of the HOA. If there was a rule, she either wrote it, enforced it, or broke it depending on her mood. Last month, she cited me for leaving a beach towel over my patio chair. The month before that, I got a warning for unauthorized water features because apparently my small pool fountain was an act of suburban rebellion. So seeing her on my property without so much as a knock, that was audacious even for her. She strutted in like she owned the place, placed Rufus on the edge of the pool, and tossed a rubber duck into the water. Go get it, boy, she chirped. And just like that, Rufus launched himself in, sending a wave over the side that splashed onto my outdoor speakers. I was still in my kitchen, staring at the camera feed with toast in hand, completely frozen. I grabbed my phone, pulled up the gate intercom, and said, Karen, what the hell are you doing in my yard? She looked around, casually waved at the camera like we were pen pals, and said, oh, lighten up, Jackson. He needed a swim, and your pool's just sitting there. Sharing is caring. I bolted outside, trying to keep my voice level. You can't just break into my yard and let your dog swim. This isn't a public park. She had the nerve to scoff. Don't be dramatic. You've got all this space, and Rufus loves water. Besides, it's not like I'm hurting anything. You can afford a little dog hair. I stood there fuming, watching fur and dog slobber float in my otherwise crystal clear pool while Rufus shook himself off and sprayed my patio cushions. Karen sauntered over to the gate, called her dog, and left without even looking back. No apology, no cleanup. Just a casual see you at the HOA meeting. I immediately downloaded the security footage and emailed it to the HOA board. Surely even they couldn't ignore this. But when I followed up the next day, I was met with silence until Brooke, the board's president and Karen's bestie, replied with a one-liner. We don't mediate neighborly disputes. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just Karen being entitled. This was a power play. She was using her HOA connections to get away with anything she pleased, and no one was willing to stand up to her. I decided then and there I wasn't going to let it slide. The next few days were a circus. My pool pump started clogging from dog fur. My speakers shorted out from that splash. And to top it off, I received a citation in the mail for unauthorized pool use. Apparently someone, I wonder who, had reported a public party at my home, citing noise complaints. I called the HOA office, furious, and got Brooke on the phone. She had the nerve to suggest I might want to clarify my pool policies to avoid confusion. It was clear the HOA was in Karen's pocket, and if I was going to fight back, I needed to get creative. I started documenting everything. I installed additional cameras, collected every notice, every email, every voicemail. I even began asking my neighbors if they'd had similar experiences. And boy, did they talk. One elderly couple told me Karen fined them for not having matching porch lights. Another guy said she once reported him for overuse of water because he washed his car during the drought. It was Karen's HOA world. We were just living in it. But while most people were too afraid to push back, I had something Karen didn't expect: time, resources, and a sense of humor. If she wanted to act like my pool was a public amenity, fine. I'd let the whole neighborhood know it was open season, on my terms. I began drafting a plan so obnoxious, so perfectly legal, and so hilariously petty that it would make Karen's stunt look like child's play. She brought a dog into my pool. I'd bring the chaos. What she didn't know was that I had connections. A friend in the entertainment business who specialized in party planning. Another who worked in safety installations. And best of all, a friend at the zoning office who once owed me a favor. I began checking every rule in the HOA charter, every zoning ordinance, every obscure clause. My goal wasn't just revenge. It was poetic justice served with bubbles and flashing lights. If Karen thought she'd walked away from this mess clean, she was about to get hit with a foam tsunami. And the best part, the whole neighborhood was going to watch. I knew that going against Karen and her tightly held grip on the HOA wouldn't be as simple as just showing some footage or filing a complaint. If it were, half the neighborhood would have had justice long ago. The more I peeled back the layers of this suburban circus, the clearer it became. Karen didn't just have influence, she had a network. It was like she'd formed her own mini-regime, and the HOA was her kingdom. I wasn't dealing with a nosy neighbor anymore. I was dealing with someone who saw control as a sport. So I dove headfirst into figuring out how deep her roots ran. The first thing I did was attend the next HOA meeting. Normally, I avoided them like spoiled milk. They were dry, bureaucratic, and filled with Karen's monologues about hedges and mailboxes. But this time, I went in with purpose. I took a seat near the back, wore my most neutral expression, and just observed. As soon as the meeting started, Karen took over like she was a game show host with an audience full of hypnotized fans. She rambled on about enforcing uniformity, new mailbox guidelines, and the need for a stricter fine structure for repeat offenders. I nearly laughed out loud when she casually suggested new limitations on pool fence colors, clearly a jab at me. When I raised my hand to speak about the dog incident, Karen smiled like a shark. "We're not here to litigate personal grudges," she said sweetly, then moved on before I could finish a sentence. The rest of the board just nodded along like bobbleheads. I looked around the room, trying to read the faces of my neighbors. Most were either uninterested, intimidated, or sipping the Evo Kool-Aid. But I caught the eye of one woman, Diana from 2 streets down, who gave me the faintest nod when Karen turned her back. That little signal told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't alone. I just needed to connect the dots. I reached out to Diana the next day under the pretense of needing a contractor recommendation. We met for coffee, and once the small talk cleared, she let out a sigh like she'd been waiting months for someone to ask. "Karen has this place on lockdown," she whispered, checking over her shoulder. "She's got Brooke wrapped around her finger. And most of the board either owes her favors or is afraid of retaliation." Diana explained how Karen once blocked her home expansion plans because her husband hadn't voted for Karen's fence initiative. Another neighbor got fined 3 times for keeping their garbage bins out 30 minutes past the allowed time on a day their child had a medical emergency. Every story I heard was worse than the last. It wasn't just about rules. Karen had turned the HOA into her own weaponized bureaucracy, and because she knew how to twist the language in the rule book, no one could ever pin her down for breaking actual laws. That's when I knew I needed more than just a viral moment or a confrontation. I needed a strategy that exposed her while staying completely within the lines. So I started to build my case in 2 parts. First, documenting how she weaponized her power, and second, finding the crack in her armor where she'd slipped up in a way she couldn't cover. I started by talking to as many neighbors as I could without raising alarms. I phrased it like casual conversation or as a shared complaint. Turns out almost everyone had some ridiculous citation or strange encounter. One man, Greg, said Karen issued him a fine for an excessive welcome mat that was apparently too large. Another family got a letter warning them about non-conforming solar decorations, aka Christmas lights. A single mother had her car towed for being parked a few inches over her own driveway line. The pattern was clear. Karen wasn't enforcing fairness. She was selectively targeting people who didn't play by her rules or who pushed back. Then came the real find. A neighbor named Walter, a mild-mannered retiree who kept to himself, showed me a folder of HOA newsletters from the last 3 years. He liked keeping records and had every notice, financial report, and annual plan archived like it was his hobby. When I flipped through the documents, something odd jumped out. There were several line items under community improvements that didn't match reality. For example, one report stated that a new irrigation system had been installed in the shared green belt behind the clubhouse. But I'd walked that path just last week. It was dry, cracked dirt with a single broken sprinkler. Another year showed an outdoor spa enhancement that matched the description of Karen's brand new private patio. I cross-referenced these expenses with actual locations and took photos. Then, with Walter's permission, I scanned all the documents and built a private folder. I started creating a timeline, when certain funds were approved, what the reports claimed, and what the real outcomes looked like. I even spotted invoices submitted under a vague company name, Green Tide Landscaping, which, after a bit of digging, turned out to be registered under Karen's nephew's name. That was the thread I'd been looking for. Not just petty tyranny, but misuse of HOA funds. Something real, something reportable. Still, I didn't want to move too fast. I needed one more thing, confirmation that I could act on this without getting crushed in a legal storm. That's when I called Marcus, an old college buddy who worked in municipal compliance and zoning. I told him the story, laid out everything I had, and asked him for insight. He laughed for a full 30 seconds before saying, "You're basically living inside a satire." But then he got serious. "You've got a shot. If your property is zoned the way I think it is, you could pull something that might not just expose her but humiliate her in the process." Marcus confirmed that my house sat in a unique zoning pocket. While the HOA governed aesthetic rules, they couldn't override zoning laws that allowed for personal event hosting. That meant, technically, I could host recurring social gatherings without needing HOA approval, as long as I wasn't charging entry. He even walked me through the local ordinances and helped me file a notice of intent for a community social event. It was the first step toward what I now called Operation Foam Party. It was all coming together. Karen had embarrassed me, damaged my property, and thought she could get away with it because of some unofficial suburban royalty title. But what she didn't count on was that I'd play her game by the rules she didn't even bother to follow. The idea wasn't just revenge. It was justice in a way that was funny, smart, and most importantly, public. Because if Karen wanted attention, she was about to get more than she could handle. The countdown to chaos had officially begun. The moment Marcus confirmed the zoning loophole, it felt like I had finally found a lever big enough to shift the weight of Karen's smug empire. It was one thing to collect evidence, but quite another to deliver poetic justice. This wasn't going to be a quiet complaint or a backdoor legal letter. No, this was going to be loud, messy, ridiculous, and unforgettable. If Karen thought letting her dog swim in my private pool was her triumphant little rebellion, she had no idea what was coming. I was about to give her, and the entire neighborhood, a memory they'd never scrub from their phones or their pride. All I needed was the right delivery system, and luckily, I had just the people for the job. My friend Tara, who owned a party supply business and lived for chaos in the form of foam, lights, and inflatable dinosaurs, practically screamed when I told her what I wanted to do. "You're telling me you want a fully operational backyard foam party with lighting effects, motion-triggered alarms, and bubble tunnels. You beautiful lunatic." "I'm in," she said, already typing up a quote. Tara had helped organize everything from music festivals to elaborate gender reveals involving parachuting teddy bears. Compared to that, my poolside prank was child's play. We mapped it all out. 2 industrial-grade foam cannons at the corners of the pool, LED floodlights sensed to music, a disco ball hung from my pergola, and most importantly, customized high-decibel alarms that would go off at timed intervals just to mess with Karen's nerves. To set the trap perfectly, I had to bait the right hook. It wasn't enough to plan the party. I had to make Karen think she was stumbling onto a rule-breaking disaster. That meant spreading just enough misinformation to make her lose her mind. I created a series of Fox community event flyers on Canva, complete with HOA-friendly branding, vague language about inclusivity, and stock images of dogs, children, and beach balls. They read things like Neighborhood Pool Bash, Come Cool Off, and Let's Build Community Through Summer Splash Events. I dropped one by the community bulletin board, left another suspiciously close to Karen's mailbox, and made sure to place a wrinkled copy under her windshield wiper while she was at the grocery store. Then came the digital bait. I posted a teaser on the neighborhood Facebook page from a burner account, just enough to spark rumors. Anyone know if the pool bash on Maple Court is HOA approved? Looks kind of official. Within hours, there were 6 comments and a flurry of messages asking if it was a sanctioned event. Karen didn't comment, but I knew her well enough to know she'd seen it. Her digital fingerprints were always nearby. I'd set the stage. Now all that was left was to pull the curtain. The day of the party arrived with perfect weather. The sky was blue. The temperature a sunny 78 degrees, and my speakers were locked and loaded with a playlist that transitioned from family-friendly beach tunes to hilariously over-the-top techno remixes. Tara and her crew arrived early and got to work transforming my backyard into what could only be described as a bubble rave engineered by Disney villains. The foam cannons hissed to life, coating the pool's surface in a white, frothy layer that smelled faintly of vanilla. Lights blinked in timed intervals, and a makeshift fire alarm box mounted on my fence read "Foam Activated, Emergency Exit Zone," just for added flair. Around 3:00 in the afternoon, guests began to arrive. People I'd casually invited under the guise of a friendly get-together. Families, kids, curious neighbors, and even a couple of HOA members I hadn't expected showed up. I handed out mock event passes printed on glossy paper just to make it look extra official. The crowd grew bigger than I thought, but everyone seemed to be having a blast. Kids were squealing with laughter as the foam piled higher. People danced on the patio, and the smell of grilled hot dogs hung in the air. It was chaos, but the good kind. I didn't have to wait long for the inevitable. Right around 4:00, I saw her. Karen stormed up the street like she was marching into battle, her phone already recording and her eyes scanning for anything she could twist into a violation. Rufus barked excitedly as he saw the foam and lunged forward. Karen, trying to keep her balance in wedge sandals, was no match for 50 pounds of golden retriever joy. He dragged her straight toward the foam-covered gate and leaped through the open side entrance like a seal at SeaWorld. Before Karen could shout a single word, Rufus had plunged into the foamy pool with a triumphant splash, triggering the first of the motion-sensitive alarms. A high-pitched siren blared. Karen screamed. The crowd turned. For a moment, it was like time froze. Then the chaos doubled. The second alarm, set to a fire truck siren, followed 30 seconds later, and the foam machines went into overdrive. Karen was now ankle-deep in bubbles, waving her arms and trying to yell over the noise. Her shrieking fused with the beat of a remix of Macarena that blared from the speakers, making her look like she was having a one-woman breakdown in a children's birthday rave. I stepped forward, arms folded, and asked loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Karen, what are you doing here? This is a private event. This is a violation. There are alarms going off and unregulated foam, and my dog could drown," she sputtered. Rufus, meanwhile, was still happily doggy paddling in a sea of froth and licking at floating bubbles like he was at an amusement park. The guests were laughing now, many recording the scene. One dad nearby even joked, "Didn't know we got live entertainment with this party." Karen charged toward me, bubbles stuck to her skirt, mascara running, yelling about HOA policies and health codes. I calmly pointed to a small laminated sign on my gate. "Private event, zoning code 14B, exempt from HOA approval. By invitation only." She stared at it like it had personally betrayed her. I leaned in and added, And by the way, your dog looks a lot happier here than he did last time you trespassed." She tried to regain composure, holding up her phone like it was a badge. "You'll be hearing from the board. This is reckless endangerment and community disruption." I simply nodded. "Great. I'll be sure to bring up the forged cease and desist letter you left last week. Maybe we can sort it all out in front of a real legal audience." Karen froze. She hadn't expected me to know. Her jaw tightened, and without another word, she turned, slipped slightly in the foam, and stomped back toward the gate. Rufus refused to follow, making a second loop around the pool before finally hopping out and shaking foam all over her as a parting gift. I handed her a towel. She didn't take it. The crowd applauded, half mockingly, as she disappeared up the street. A few people clapped me on the back. One woman laughed and said, "Best HOA event I've ever been to." Another neighbor added, "That's the first time I've seen Karen speechless." I raised my lemonade in the air and smiled. This wasn't the end of the battle, but it was one heck of a middle. And as the lights pulsed and bubbles swirled under the sunset sky, I knew one thing for sure. This war had only just begun, and I was winning with foam. By the next morning, the foam had evaporated. The lawn chairs were drying in the sun, and the scent of grilled hot dogs still faintly lingered in the air. But the aftermath of the party wasn't just physical. It had rippled through the neighborhood like a gossip-fueled tsunami. Overnight, the community Facebook group was flooded with videos and photos from the event. Karen flailing in foam while her dog happily swam circles around her had unintentionally become the star of the show. One clip in particular, where Rufus leaped into the pool and triggered the siren, had been captioned, "Doggo declares war on Eto'o Queen," and was rapidly spreading beyond our local circle. I had to admit, even I didn't expect the spectacle to go semi-viral. What I did expect was retaliation, and Karen did not disappoint. By noon, I had a stack of fresh HOA citations stuffed into my mailbox. One claimed I had created a hazardous aquatic environment. Another accused me of noise pollution, and one even bizarrely alleged unlawful foam dispersal. The cherry on top was a formal letter from the HOA board demanding I pay a series of escalating fines totaling over $2,000. It was laughable. The citations were nonsense, all vaguely worded and clearly retaliatory. But what made it even more interesting was the included cease and desist letter, printed on fake legal letterhead and riddled with formatting errors. It looked official at a glance, but it was amateur hour in font form. I called my lawyer, and within minutes, he confirmed my suspicions. "This isn't real," he said, chuckling. "It's like someone copy-pasted from a courtroom drama script and hoped no one would notice." Also, there's no legal weight to these citations unless your HOA has direct jurisdiction over private events, and they don't, especially not with that zoning exemption. He drafted an official response letter and attached it to a complaint we were preparing to submit to the county. But that wasn't all. He also pointed out that impersonating legal authority, especially when tied to financial demands, could be considered fraud, and if Karen had sent this herself or had someone do it for her, she was in deep trouble. Still, I knew I needed something more than just a response. I needed to expose her behavior in a way that couldn't be brushed off by Brooke or anyone else on the HOA board. The party had been a blow to her ego, but she could spin that as a personal embarrassment. What I needed was undeniable proof of corruption. That meant digging deeper into the shady HOA finances I'd begun reviewing with Walter and Diana. We started combing through more records, tracing suspicious expense lines, and cross-referencing contractor names. It didn't take long before we struck gold. One of the vendors listed for multiple landscaping jobs was Everbright Services, supposedly contracted for quarterly maintenance of the community park. But according to Diana and several others, the park hadn't seen a single rake or lawn mower in months. No receipts, no crew photos, no invoices, just check entries in the financial statement. I looked up the business registration and found it was registered under a different name, Taylor Green. A quick social media search later confirmed what we suspected. Taylor was Karen's nephew, the same one who had miraculously won the last HOA landscaping contract without any bidding process. It was the crack we needed. I compiled a complete report detailing every red flag, including the false citations, misused funds, fabricated legal threats, and ghost maintenance projects. Diana added her own statement about being targeted. Walter contributed his archived documents. We packaged everything neatly, added photos and timestamps, and submitted it to the local community journalist who had once covered HOA overreach stories in the county newsletter. I also sent a copy to the County HOA Oversight Committee with a formal complaint, and for good measure, I forwarded a copy anonymously to every homeowner on the HOA mailing list. A few days later, the fallout began. It started small. An official-looking car pulled up to the HOA office trailer and stayed there for hours. Then came a city inspector walking the community grounds, clipboard in hand, inspecting everything from signage to electrical outlets on Karen's side of the clubhouse. I knew what that meant. Someone had finally taken our complaint seriously. That evening, Karen was noticeably absent from her usual HOA patrol rounds. No one saw her walk Rufus. No Facebook posts. Radio silence. It was the calm before the real storm. Then the local paper published the article, Suburban Foam Party Uncovers OO Fraud Scandal. It had everything. Quotes from residents, screenshots of fake citations, photos of the untouched community park, and even a side-by-side image of Karen at the foam party and her nephew's landscaping website, which showed a single stock image of a lawn and no contact form. The article exploded across the neighborhood. People were furious, not just at the corruption, but at how long it had gone unchecked. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Residents who hadn't shown up in years were suddenly demanding answers. Karen, cornered and red-faced, tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding. She blamed clerical errors, claimed her nephew had been subcontracted unknowingly, and insisted the cease and desist letter had been a misprint sent by an intern. Brooke looked like she wanted to melt into her chair. When I calmly stood up and read from the complaint aloud, Karen tried to interrupt, only for 3 other neighbors to shut her down. The board was forced to vote on her suspension pending investigation. It passed unanimously, but that wasn't even the final blow. The next morning, Karen's front yard was visited by code enforcement officers who marked several unapproved modifications to her spa patio, including illegal electrical work and unpermitted structures. Her kingdom was collapsing piece by piece. She tried filing complaints of her own, but they were now scrutinized and frequently rejected. The HOA restructured, new board elections were scheduled, and an independent auditor was brought in. I declined to run for a board seat. I had no interest in replacing her. I just wanted peace and maybe a slightly more sane neighborhood. The best part, the foam party was now legendary. Kids still talked about it like it was a theme park event. One guy even asked if I'd make it an annual tradition. I didn't say yes or no, but I did keep Tara's number on speed dial, just in case. Karen, meanwhile, had gone quiet. Her dogs still barked happily on their walks, but she kept her head down, no longer the queen of anything. Sometimes justice isn't about screaming the loudest. Sometimes it's about collecting every receipt, every broken rule, and every smug look and turning it all into a spectacularly bubbly reckoning that nobody forgets. What started as a petty act of entitlement had triggered a cascade of truth, and no amount of citations or complaints could put that genie, or the foam, back in the bottle. A few weeks had passed since the foam-filled showdown and the storm that followed Karen's collapse from her self-built throne. The neighborhood felt lighter somehow. The glares, the tension, the passive-aggressive HOA notices, they had all seemed to evaporate with her authority. For the first time in years, people were planting flowers without fear, letting their kids chalk the sidewalks without citations, and even putting up seasonal decorations without an official inquiry. The transformation was subtle but powerful. It wasn't just about the rules. It was about people no longer feeling watched like inmates under surveillance. And despite all of that, I still hadn't quite felt the moment of full closure. Not yet. I had one last thing in mind, something I hadn't told anyone about, something that would put a final, ridiculous, poetic twist on this whole saga. It came to me one morning as I was sipping coffee by the pool. The very same pool Karen once invaded without shame. The water sparkled, calm and pristine again. The pool filter had been replaced. The foam residue was long gone. And yet I couldn't forget how it had all started. Her dog, Rufus, leaping into my pool like it was a community splash pad while she acted like trespassing was just part of suburban life. That single moment had exploded into a chain reaction that brought her empire down. But the dog, poor Rufus, he had been nothing more than a happy, clueless participant. And weirdly, the dog had somehow become a symbol of it all. So I figured, if the dog was the beginning, maybe the dog should also be the end. I sent out a new round of invitations. No flyers, no online posts, just private texts and word of mouth between the people I trusted. This time, there would be no foam cannons or alarm systems, no lights or sirens, just one final backyard event, a barbecue and chill evening to officially celebrate the neighborhood's new start. People arrived in waves, families with kids, retired couples, young professionals, all smiling and relaxed. Some brought baked goods, others brought folding chairs. Everyone brought stories. Someone even brought a Bluetooth karaoke machine. It felt like a summer block party, the kind that used to only happen in movies and ads, but now finally felt possible here, in our very real, very healed little suburb. Then, just as the sun dipped below the roof lines and the string lights came on, I looked down the sidewalk and saw a familiar shape trotting down the pavement. Rufus, his tongue flopping out happily, his tail wagging like a metronome of joy, Karen trailing behind on the leash. She looked hesitant but not hostile. She wasn't wearing one of her usual garish sun hats or HOA shirts. No clipboard, no foam in her hand, just jeans, a simple top, and the awkwardness of someone who wasn't used to walking into a space where she wasn't in charge. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I thought she might turn around. But instead, she sighed and walked straight up to the fence. "I wasn't invited," she said flatly. I replied, neither was Rufus the first time, but he made quite the splash. There was a pause. She smirked a little. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't icy either. Then she asked, "Mind if he comes in for a bit?" "He keeps pulling toward your gate every time we walk by." I looked down at Rufus, who wagged harder, as if confirming the request. I opened the gate without a word. Rufus barreled in like he owned the place, circled the grill, and made himself comfortable near a lawn chair. Karen followed quietly, staying at the edge of the gathering. No one said much to her, but no one asked her to leave either. She didn't stay long, maybe 20 minutes. She didn't eat, didn't mingle. But when she left, she looked back once and gave a small wave. Not the controlling kind, not the dismissive kind, just a wave, a neighbor's wave. And that, strangely, felt like the final stamp on this chapter. The war was over. The battlefield was now just a backyard. Over the next few days, the new HOA board began holding open forums. Brooke had stepped down voluntarily, and in her place was a rotating panel of 5 residents, including Walter and Diana. They announced plans for real transparency, public budgets, recorded meetings, even an online suggestion box. People actually smiled at board meetings now, and there was coffee and donuts instead of tension and whispered threats. I attended a few sessions, offered a couple of ideas, then stepped back. I didn't want to become a Karen replacement. I didn't want a crown. I just wanted to live without worrying about whether my lawn gnome violated city ordinances. One afternoon, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a plain wooden plaque with a tiny golden engraving. It read, "Best use of foam in a civilian uprising." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped it. A small post-it was stuck to the back with a scribbled message. "Neighborhood morale is up 30%. Might be time for another party. No alarms this time." There was no name, but I recognized Diana's handwriting. I placed the plaque above my patio bar, next to a mounted waterproof speaker. In the end, what started as a petty violation had ignited a movement. Not a loud protest or a legal crusade, but something sneakier and somehow more satisfying. A reminder that ridiculousness, when mixed with strategy and just the right dose of nerve, could topple even the most entrenched neighborhood tyrant. Karen had ruled with citations, scowls, and a chokehold on the HOA rulebook. I'd responded with bubbles, legal loopholes, and a party that doubled as a revolution. And it worked, not because of power, but because people finally had a reason to laugh together again. Now, when I sit by my pool and sip lemonade, the only sirens I hear are distant ones from actual emergency services. No fire alarms, no HOA officers, no dogs jumping uninvited into the deep end. The pool is still private, the gate is still locked, and the camera still works, just in case. But the tension is gone. The neighbors who once avoided each other now wave across fences. Kids ride bikes without worry. And me? I just enjoy the peace, knowing that sometimes the most effective justice doesn't need a courtroom. Sometimes it just needs foam, fire alarms, and the guts to say no with a smile. And as for Karen, she still walks Rufus every day, but now she walks him on the opposite side of the street when she passes my house. Not out of anger, but out of respect, maybe even embarrassment. Either way, that's fine by me. The queen had her reign. Now she's just another neighbor. And my pool. Still sparkling, still exclusive, still protected by the most legendary backyard party the HOA will never forget.